and Communications here at TSU. The purpose of this session is to speak directly to the campus family about the financial action plan. And as we say in news, to give you the who, what, and why. Now, on Friday, Interim President Ronald Johnson disseminated a video message to the campus about the financial action plan and followed up with a campus communication earlier today. Again, this information session is for you. You will hear first from President Johnson as he gives opening remarks and a brief presentation. Following the president is Dr. Darrell Barnett, Senior Advisor and Interim Executive Vice President, who will discuss the three components of the financial action plan. You will have the opportunity to submit questions throughout the session for the Q&A segment immediately following President Johnson's and Dr. Barnett's presentations and their remarks. You may submit your questions to the Q&A section. Now, it is my pleasure to turn things over to President Ronald Johnson. President Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining this call. I'd like to begin by just noting that it is a time for action. It's a time that we recognize that will represent challenges, but in order for us to move into the future, we have to do so with a focus on that future. And so today we'll provide information related to the financial action plan that I introduced to our board last week. TSU is a unique social impact enterprise, and our impact is on transforming lives and igniting new possibilities for the world. We do that through 4 channels. We do that as an HBCU. We do that as an 1890 land-grant institution. We do that as a comprehensive regional university. And we also do that as a Carnegie classification R2 institution for higher research activity. Our stakeholders, students, faculty, staff, alums, the state of Tennessee, and others expect us to maintain a financially stable institution. Nationwide colleges and universities, whether elite institutions or smaller colleges, are grappling with structural budget deficits and financial sustainability challenges. This is not an isolated issue with respect to TSU. It is a systematic problem affecting the entire higher education landscape. At TSU, we face similar financial pressures to those elsewhere. While we have unique strengths and resources, long-standing financial challenges must be addressed to ensure our continued success. TSU has been navigating financial and operational challenges for several years, reflected in persistent structural budget deficits. Our structural budget deficits and outdated financial controls have significantly challenged university stability. In 2019, an external review commissioned by the university highlighted critical issues, including misalignment of staff and faculty and the need for operational and organizational improvements. These changes are part of what we are looking to do today. The 2019 report previous audits by the Tennessee Comptroller of the Treasury and the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, and findings from our most recent assessment all underscore the urgency of TSU's current situation. We've launched the TSU Financial Action Plan, which is a crucial component of our broader trajectory change initiative, which you actually see on the screen. I will talk about that momentarily. The Trajectory Change Initiative needs to have a stabilization component in place, and that's what the Financial Action Plan is about. When we talk about TCI involves elevating our impact and elevating our competitive edge. In that context, we do more. But what is elevating our impact? Well, certainly, I told you that we are a social impact enterprise. And certainly the university part of us, that is the HBCU and a regional comprehensive university, our impact has got to be in terms of the progression of our students, the training of our students for relevant opportunities when they leave here, and having them here until they complete, ideally in 4 years. That's the impact that we're talking about, that we have to elevate. And if we elevate that impact and do certain things that I've talked about in the past in terms of making our place, our institution, more than a place, it involves place making, then we elevate that combination elevates a competitive edge, and therefore we're doing more to be more, to be more financially sustainable, to be more like a thriving concern. We launched this plan, as I mentioned, with a goal of transforming TSU into a future-ready institution. And of course, we have to act now. Through our shared commitment and decisive action, we have the power to build a stronger TSU that is financially stable, resilient, and well-equipped to meet the increasing demands of the 21st century. I'll be available for questions momentarily. I will turn the mic over to my colleague, Dr. Darrell Burnett.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and good afternoon, my fellow colleagues. I would like to go back to the study that Dr. Johnson referenced, the 2019 study, of which several areas were looked at. But one key component or one key assessment in that study was the staffing ratio. The staffing ratio of the personnel in relationship to our student. In 2015, we had a student head count of 9,167 individuals. In 2019, when the study was concluded, the enrollment dropped from 9,000 to 7,780, an 18% reduction. Now, when that student headcount was at 9,176, the staffing ramped up to support that student body. But when it began to decline, the staffing did not. And today, as I presented last week, today's student headcount is 6,310. Now, when you start taking a look at the staffing ratio of Tennessee State University and comparing it with our peer institutions, in the study, it concluded that Tennessee State staffing ratio was 10-1. Whereas when we were compared to our peer institution, I'm sorry, let me go back. The Tennessee State University ratio at that time, 2019, was 7-1, compared to our peer institution, which was 10-1. That's the average. In other words, staffing were supporting more students. In comparison to one of our state institutions, one of the LGIs, Middle Tennessee State, its staffing ratio to student was 14-1. So you're going to see how our numbers were much lower compared to not only our peer institutions across the country, similar size as far as our institution is concerned, but also schools within the state of Tennessee. As President Johnson pointed out, there's 3 tiers to our financial action plan. 3 tiers to our financial action plan. The first tier is a hiring freeze. We have a staffing level that exceeds over 1,000 workers. That's the size of our workforce. And that's the bulk of our budget. So we have to take a look and make sure that we are able to cover that cost when it comes to the revenue that we're receiving through tuition and fees and state support. So the first tier of our financial action plan is to freeze all new hires. We're going to keep those positions that are vacant, and we're talking about both E and G, and we're going to also take a look at those grants. But at most, we have to freeze all of the positions. The second tier of the financial action plan is a spending freeze on all non-essential expenditures. We got travel, supply, fuels. It's just a myriad of different types of expenditures that we are obligated on a daily basis, and we have to find a way to freeze all of those non-essential expenditures. The leaders in each one of the various different divisions will take a look at those different needs and requirements over the course of the year, and then make a decision whether or not these actions are non-essentials or not. The last tier of our financial plan is a strategic alignment of the workforce. As I pointed out earlier, Tennessee State University workforce makes up about 70% of the university's budget. So we'll take a look and find those adjustments, look at those critical areas that needs to be ramped up because we have to recruit and maintain our student. Those are our customers. And then we have to address the university structural deficits. Those are the three tiers of the financial action plan. I'll turn this back over to Ms. Sharp.
Thank you, Dr. Burnett. Now we come to the portion of the information session where we take questions and answers. And the first question, I will direct this toward you, President Johnson. Is this a financial crisis?
The answer is yes. The challenge of why it is a crisis at this time is because we have actually increased our spending relative to what was going on in 2019, and at the same time have seen a fall off in our enrollment. Consequently, we have to now take steps to bring our spending in line with our revenues. This has been going on for several years. It was going on before 2019. That's why that study was commissioned. But at this juncture, we have to move, especially given that overspending accelerated during the fiscal years 2023 and 2024.
The next question, and President Johnson, I'll direct this to you. What is the impact on student scholarships and financial aid? And the second part of this question is, what about those students that we promised 4-year full ride scholarships? Will they be affected? Will our coaches be left to try to navigate after planning these scholarship dollars?
The answer is, the straight answer is no, there will be no effect. Obviously, we are working through the process, looking at each student and looking at each obligation that the university has made to our students. We will fulfill our obligations to our students, and therefore our students should not worry. Only, midterms are coming up, they need to worry about those.
Okay. Dr. Burnett, this question, I'd like to see if you could answer this question. Will there be a hiring freeze?
The answer is yes again, and we will implement a position control policy where emphasis will be placed on hiring in all units, those positions that we feel will be mission critical to the institution. As senior advisor, I will provide more information on the hiring freeze and how we'll go about carrying that out. But yes, there will be a hiring freeze from this point forward.
And on the subject of freeze, another question we have is, in terms of freeze on travel, does it only apply to travel requests submitted from this point forward? Will travel where requests have already been made for conferences that are occurring soon be supported?
Excellent question, Ms. Sharp. Many of the commitments have already been made to attend a number of conferences and workshop and training events and activities. We will have to take a look at each one individually and make an assessment. As I mentioned before, when we are planning for future travel, instead of sending 2 or 3 or 4 people, our goal is to send maybe 1 or 2 and let those individuals bring the information back. Other means of communicating with various different constituents outside of the area is through Zoom and Teams. So we have to take advantage of our electronic capabilities in order to gather new information to effectively do our job. Yes, travel will be looked at. It won't be stopped, but we will have to cut back in order to ensure that we stay within the confines of the funding that we have to cover our expenditures.
Okay, and Dr. Barnett, since you were talking about this in our financial action plan, I have a couple of questions as they relate to staffing. The first, will temp faculty or adjunct hiring be affected? And how will grant spending be handled? Are we still able to implement our grants?
Yes, grants are, let me back up. Temp and graduate assistants will be impacted because we have to be able to pay the salaries of those individuals. So we'll look at those on a case-by-case basis, ensure that there's adequate funding, or we'll just have to hold back on those types of support and leverage the full-time employees that we currently have here on our payroll. As far as the contracts and grants are concerned, those are restricted dollars. You have the grantor that have specific covenants in those grants, but the goal is to continue to fulfill the requirements of the grants and to ensure that those research initiatives are adequately staffed.
We have one question, and maybe President Johnson or Dr. Burnett, you can answer this question. What exactly do you mean by staff misalignment?
Okay, I can take that question. Staff misalignment means that you either have staff that are engaged in activities that are duplications, staff in areas where the university is no longer actually focused in that specific set of duties, staff that actually are in need of training so that they can actually work in areas that are more of a priority. All organizations go through this. I point out to people that IBM is not a mainframe company anymore. So the people that they had to either be retrained or those aspects of IBM that no longer is relevant then had to end. In the tech sector is looking at AI, and AI is replacing coding. You don't need the coders anymore. And so that doesn't mean the coders have to go. They have to then be retrained to actually work in the areas that are important for the organization to be successful.
Okay.
And I may add, here at Tennessee State Universities, when we take a look at the organization chart, you have an assistant director working for a director who's working for an associate vice president who's working for a vice president. A lot of layers of supervisory levels. However, those numbers were probably needed back when the enrollment was high, but now that their enrollment is declining, then you have a misalignment of authority. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at that are indigenous to Tennessee State University when we talk about alignment readjustments.
And in addition, I would just add, because and thank you, Dr. Burnett, for actually giving that example, because that's another area. One of the issues in terms of alignment is that the role of the manager is actually not to manage people. The role of the manager is to manage the processes to ensure that the people who have to engage, who are at the front line, have the tools and the support that they need in order to be able to do what they need to do. A very, very highly stilted hierarchy means that you wind up managing people. That's not what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to actually respect our people and understand that we brought them on board because we know that they could do the job. Our job is to make sure that they have the tools and the support to be successful.
We have several questions again regarding travel, and I'm not sure if people are just getting on, but can we just clarify? We have questions that we have conferences coming up in the next 2 weeks. Will that travel be denied? What about conferences that we've already put money in for travel? Can we just I don't know if we can put a nice bow on this, but can we just talk about travel and where that falls within the financial action plan so we can move on to another question?
Let me answer that question, and Dr. Johnson, you can come along at any time. Again, travel would be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Each vice president that reports to Dr. Johnson is fully aware of the condition that the institution is in right now. And again, like I said earlier, if there's an alternate way of gathering information from those conferences or workshops or things that have been scheduled, then let's pursue that avenue rather than buying an airline ticket and a hotel in the advance of covering the per diem while you're there. We're in a crisis, and we have to look at alternate way of getting the information that's being shared at those conferences. If the conference is imminent, let's send one person or two people. Let's make sure that we're taking frugal steps, ensuring that we are leveraging the minimum level dollars that we currently have so that we can meet the needs of that particular travel initiative.
I would just add that it's important to note that if the travel is grant funded, clearly those funds are there for a specific purpose, and and of course we will utilize those funds. But we will also ask our team members to look to make sure that when they go, that they share the results when with the rest of the people in their program or in their department, so that we actually now have a closer knit organization where we share information to make everyone better.
Okay, the next question. Salaries can account for 70% plus of a budget. Are any and all positions terminations on the board because essential departments are woefully understaffed, even with the lower number of students? Some departments are barely making do even before now. How can they work within this financial action plan, even though they're already understaffed?
I'll take that. Part of our focus is, of course, it's a process. And that's why I spent the moment talking about the TCI. In the end, the TCI has three components to it, or three parts. The first part is stabilization. That's where we are right now with the financial action plan. The second part is performance, and then the third part is transformation. We actually have to actually work on all three parts at the same time. However, as we get stabilization under our belt, we no longer have to work on that. Performance is essentially where we are able to eliminate the sources of the systemic deficits that this institution has found itself in. First, we have to stabilize, and we have to find all of the places where we are just not doing the right thing. In order for us to be a future-ready institution, and of course, ready even today to meet our mission, we have to make sure that we are properly staffed in those areas that are critical to the overall success of the university. So yes, it's a process that we've committed to, and the process is not a process of cutting. I don't believe that cutting gets you anywhere. However, we have to actually now move our spending in line with our revenues. But as we do that, we have to look to do what I had indicated in that slide earlier, that we have to elevate our impact. And we don't elevate our impact by eliminating people who are necessary for us to be successful, necessary for us to deliver the services that we are obligated to deliver to our external stakeholders as well as our students.
Also, if I may add, Ms. Sharp, when you go through a process, you're expecting to see an outcome. when you compare our performances, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, with our peer institutions, we should be looking at course completion, graduation, a multitude of different ratios that reflects outcomes from the performance of the various different units on the institution. So at the very end, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, he, along with myself and the respective VP and the department heads, will all sit down, take a look at those shortages, and make an assessment as to how we can implement a workforce that is efficient and effective as we serve our student body.
And Dr. Barnett, I think this is a question perhaps for you. With the strategic realignment, does that include salary decreases? If so, has the decision been made regarding the percentage of the decrease?
We're not discarding anything right now when it comes to the reduction in the salaries. What we are looking at are the positions at this moment. We'll be working with our consultants to make sure that our cash flow is meeting the expenditures. But at this point in time, no salary reduction is being considered.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I would just add this one part to what Dr. Burnett said, that we're not looking at base salary reductions, but we are looking at our staffing and trying to understand where and when extra service pay is properly assigned. So we're not looking at reduction in base salary, but we are going to look at these extra items because we have to come to grips with if we don't have enough staff in a specific area, or if we don't have the staff that has all of the tools that we need, then that means that it's not a financial issue. It's a performance issue on the part of the university, and so we will be looking at it from that standpoint.
And President Johnson, this may be a question for you. What is the plan to receive the funds owed to TSU by the state of Tennessee?
As well as myself, have not turned down any opportunity to get resources for the university. We will evaluate all of the opportunities and move forward with them. I would say, though, that the funds that are owed, typically land grant funds are for land grant purposes. Courses that land grant faculty teach, research that land grant faculty engage in, and extension services. So they are very, very specific and restricted funds. Land grant is an integral part of this university, and as a result, we will pursue opportunities to get the funding that is due to the institution. But I would also point out that that doesn't mean that we don't do what we're doing right now.
And speaking of grants, how will grant spending be handled? Are we still able to implement our grants?
I can take a little bit of this one, Dr. Johnson. The answer is yes. When we speak of a grant, that is an obligation that the university have engaged in. There's an expected output as a result of the contract that we've signed with the grantor. So we will meet those requirements as it relates to the grant. The challenge that we have with the grant, the university use its E&G funds, education and general funds, to pay the cost of the services associated with the grant. And then we draw those funds down from the source of the grant. So we have to monitor the day-to-day drawdowns of the resources from the grant that's commensurate with the funding that we have available to cover those bills. So instead of drawing down on a quarterly basis, we will probably draw down on a monthly basis just to get a general idea of where we are. But we want to make sure that those invoices are being covered that are related to the grant and that we have adequate funds to cover that. And like I said earlier, draw those funds and put those funds right back into our bank account to meet our day-to-day E&G requirements.
And in fact, to Dr. Burnett's point, again, he's giving you really the straight story there. That to a large extent, the university itself winds up serving as a liquidity bank. Okay, that we are obligated to actually pay for whatever it is that's in the grant, and then we pull down the grant monies. In many instances, we can't pull the grant money for 3 days. And so if it's a holiday weekend, it may be a whole week before we can actually pull the funds down. Well, we're not really a bank, but that's how the grants are processed. So one of the things that I will be working with Dr. Quick and also Dr. Melton is to get with our PIs and get a more complete understanding, not just the PI's understanding what I just described, but more complete understanding of the spending plans that are in the grants so that we can actually better align those spending plans with our cash flow availability. In every university that I've been in, we've had to, at least in the parts of the university that I've been responsible for, I've had to work with our faculty to get the faculty to line up their spending plan so that it actually works with both mainly the federal government's fiscal year and the university's fiscal year. The gap between those two can be really burdensome from a cash flow standpoint for the university. And so we need to actually work with you to get that alignment. That will help tremendously as we move forward.
The alignment and the forecast through the end of the year, we should know exactly how those expenditures are going to hit the book so that we can, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, ensure that the adequate funds are available to cover the cost. And a lot of times you could just look at the pattern from the previous year if it's the same amount associated with the grant. Or if it's a new grant, you work with the grantor and get a joint idea of what those monthly expenditures are going to be through the end of the term. But we got to get more analytical when it comes to analyzing the data and forecasting the result. That way we're prepared to ensure that we have adequate funds in our reserves to offset the cost of those grants.
And I would also add that it's not just the cash flow issues. It's actually a really important practice. If TSU is going to continue on its path towards an R1 status, we actually have to manage our spending plans better. Each year, we do not spend the full amount on grants that we actually have available. That's one of the measures that's used to determine whether you qualify for R1 status. So we actually have to do this. And again, this is an example of what TCI is about. TCI is about strengthening this institution so that it is future ready. The financial action plan, though, is here because we have to have stabilization. That's the first stage.
Another piece on the grant, and I apologize, Ms. Sharp, because this is very important, is the indirect cost recovery, IDC. We have to make sure that on those grants, a certain portion of it, based on what's been negotiated, comes back to the institution to cover the support, the E&G support to those grants. So we're going to take a deep dive in looking at the policy and the covenants associated with those grants and ensure that the institution gets its costs back for cutting on the lights, cooling the rooms, cleaning the rooms, all of the services that we are spending funds towards supporting those grants. So we got to take a look at the indirect cost overhead rates and ensuring that we're drawing down adequate funds to replenish the services that we're giving to those activities.
And Dr. Barnett or President Johnson, this may be a question for you. Based upon the financial action plan and having to cut individuals, how many positions may have to be cut?
Well, to be quite honest, I don't know the answer to that question. We're engaged in a process, and that process involves, of course, the VPs, and in many cases, people below the vice president level. As we go through the process, we're looking to do certain things. Clearly, we want to bring our spending in better alignment with our revenues. But as we indicated, we are able to do that through three actions: freezing hiring, and therefore prioritizing if we hire someone that they have to be mission critical or they have to be grant funded. Two, that we are looking at reining back non-essential spending. And then three, we are looking at strategic realignment. So strategic realignment is not just looking at adjustments of the workforce. We are taking a sharp eye to what I consider a lot of waste. We have buildings on the campus that are hardly used and buildings on the campus that are not used at all. Yet those buildings use air conditioning or essentially cooling, and they use heat, essentially steam, and they use water for no people or for very, very few people. So we have to go through and look at getting costs, and that's significant sorts of costs. You go and turn your kitchen faucet on and let it just drip for a year and look at your water bill. So one of the aspects of this strategic alignment is actually aligning our physical plant to what it is that we're doing, and therefore lowering our overall utility costs. So this is a process of gaining stability. It's not simply looking at the workforce. However, the workforce, of course, is important. And we have to make sure that the workforce is aligned with our ability to increase our impact in the areas of productivity that are tied to what this institution is about. So this institution, as a regional comprehensive institution and an HBCU, is about bringing students in, transforming those students into people who have capabilities in the professional world, keeping them until they complete, preferably in 4 years. Okay, that's what we're supposed to be looking at in terms of our resources, in terms of allocation. We have to make sure that we have them properly resourced and properly aligned there. But there are other areas that we know that we have to address.
This next question has to do with student activities and athletics. How will this affect student activities and athletics and the upcoming homecoming activities?
Well, I can address. Let me start out with the homecoming activity. There's a homecoming committee, and the homecoming committee has been working diligently since, I guess, August on the homecoming plans. I've not been engaged in that. I'm not involved directly in that committee. And so my expectations is that the committee, which also includes students, has been moving forward with the plans for this homecoming. Clearly, the committee has to be mindful about what we spend our money on, but there have been no decisions that I know of that curtail homecoming, and so that's as far as I know. In terms of athletics and the like, um, we are not looking at curtailing athletics, but we do need to look at athletics in the context of NC2A, NIL, name, likely, and image. Many universities, I certainly know that Vanderbilt is doing this. They're looking at their athletics area because one, that there's a lawsuit that may be settled and we may owe several hundreds of thousands of dollars over a period of years to settle out that. And where's that money going to come from? So we actually have to look more closely at what it is that we're doing. It doesn't mean we're cutting athletics, no. What it means is that we have to actually look and see what we're doing so to make sure that we are, one, doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of our student athletes, and then two, understanding what relationship we have and obligations that we have now in the new environment that we face with the NC2A.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Johnson. This is a question for Dr. Burnett. As it relates to the spending freezes with outstanding invoices, will there be a process? What is the process for getting invoices approved and paying vendors, even those that have not been paid for several months?
Excellent question. We've already tallied up all of the invoices that should have been paid last fiscal year. So we're tackling those requirements because the services have already been rendered. We are obligated to pay the vendor. And so we're doing that on a day-to-day basis. Then we're tackling the ones that we are encountering this fiscal year. That's also a challenge, but we're looking at paying those bills where we do have adequate funds to cover them. And then those that are a little bit large, because we have some large customers, such as Aeromark, Elutions. And so we're working with those particular industries or companies to see how we can leverage the payment out over the course of the year, giving the availability of funds to cover those requirements. So it's a day-to-day basis, our day-to-day challenge that we're working with right now until we can generate enough reserves to sustain the institution. But it is a challenge, and we're tackling them. But there, again, like I said earlier, there's an obligation because the services have been rendered, and we have to fulfill that payment to the customer.
Can you also speak to that in regards of work study pay for students and our graduate assistants as pending payment and invoices needing to be paid?
Yes, our mission is to take care of our students. They shouldn't be penalized for any of this that has happened, and we'll work through those requirements because, again, they're here to earn a degree, and we're going to fulfill those requirements. Now, many of our students who are on work study, those funds are being dispersed through the federal government, and those dollars will be adequate enough to cover those salaries of those individuals. As far as graduate assistants, again, that's a service that's not as costly as a full-time employee. So we're going to welcome those opportunities. But again, as I said before, this is a very, very tedious process because our reserves are extremely limited. So we're going to have to look at every single expenditures, whether large or small, on a case-by-case basis to ensure that we physically have money in the bank to cover that cost.
What role will members of the President's Cabinet play in this financial action plan?
Well, the cabinet is engaged in the process of looking at their organizations, or looking at the organization structures, as Dr. Burnett had indicated. When we compare ourselves to other LGIs, like Austin or others, we have an extraordinarily heavily stacked organization structure. As he said, we have coordinators reporting to directors, directors reporting to executive directors reporting to assistant directors, and assistant directors reporting to associate directors, who are then reporting to assistant VPs and reporting to and then you say, who's doing the work? Okay, so we are sitting with our VPs and looking at our structure to see whether or not all of those extra layers of management are needed, and also whether manager X or leader X in one department should actually be the leader in another department. Okay, so we're looking, so it's not like we're going to just get rid of middle management. It means that we're going to be looking at how we deploy our people. The main reason for the management at the level below the VP is to manage process. And so let me just explain so that people understand why there is a hierarchy. At a university, there is, of course, the governing body, and that's the board. Yes, there is shared governance. However, the board is the recognized entity for the institution. And so shared governance means that the board actually must hear the voices of the faculty as well as the staff, and then make decisions based on having those dialogues. The president, the president's job is really to lay out the strategies to achieve the vision and to work to get people to buy in, beginning with the cabinet. The cabinet is there to focus on laying out implementation strategies within their divisions. And then the people under them, deans, department chairs, or managers, their job is to make sure that the processes and support of those implementation strategies are there and are properly executed. So that's the way the structure should be. And so when we look across the board, across our organization, that's what we're looking for. And when you have a system like that in place, then you have interoperability, then you have cross-functional benefits that you receive because everything is now aligned. And that's why we call that last piece in terms of the financial action plan, strategic alignment or strategic realignment.
President Johnson, this is also a question probably for you. Regarding the hiring freeze, could you expand on the term mission critical for assessing the need to fill currently open searches for tenure-track faculty?
Well, mission critical is, of course, going to be defined in the specific areas. So, for instance, if we were looking at our police force, it's mission critical that we have the proper number of sworn officers. We have a large area that has to be patrolled, and we know we live in an environment where all kinds of things can happen. The safety and health of the people on this campus is the number one priority of this administration, and I can speak for our board as well. And as a result, that would be an area that's mission critical. But it's mission critical is tied to the specific areas. If we actually ran the food service, mission critical would be making sure that all of our people have been properly trained in terms of food safety. So it's not one of those things where you can actually just say across the board, that one person is mission critical. No, it's within each function. Each function is important here. We are contributing as a team to the overall success of the institution and meeting its mission and its obligations.
As it relates to student services and enrollment, our mission is to recruit, retain, and graduate students. Those are mission critical areas. So we have to get out on the road and begin recruiting kids who are ready to go to college and pursue a degree. So as Dr. Johnson pointed out, there's a multitude of areas what we would consider mission critical, but we're here to educate students. They are our clients. And so we have to ensure that we are strategic in the areas where we travel in order to recruit the best student who can deal with the rigor of our academic programs.
And this question may be for you, Dr. Barnett, as well, President Johnson. Based upon the financial action plan and the university's current financial standing, is there a time frame on how long these freezes will take place?
Well, I should start, and Dr. Burnett, of course, he's at the front. I'm sort of like in the uh, position where I'm touching every aspect of the institution in a particular way, and he's touching it in another way. The thing is that I arrived here physically in town on the 7th of July, 1st of July, as the board asked me. I began all day Zoom meetings with members of the cabinet and others to get an understanding. Well, it is not the 8th of October yet. And so I can tell you that a lot of this has happened very, very quickly. So I can't give you a target date at this point because as we continue to engage the process, we are then developing a better understanding of what needs to happen and when.
And if I may add, Dr. Johnson and Ms. Sharp, um, it's going to take 2 or 3 years. It took a while to get us in this situation, as you recall, the president opening remarks regarding the study that was done in 2019. There were issues then when costs was exceeding the revenue streams coming into the institution. So going forward, and I've experienced that in a couple of other universities that were placed on fiscal watch, it took at least 2 to 3 years to right the ship. One of the pieces that we have to also look at are the number of contracts that we are currently obligated with. We have to ensure that those contracts are mission essential, and those that are not, we need to eliminate. But it's going to take time in some cases to wean ourselves off of those old contracts and begin doing things either through our data warehouse banner, or we have to find an alternate way if it's a duplication. So I would say the right sizing of the workforce have to be commensurate with our student body. And right now is out of sync, and it's going to take a full court press as we're tackling the issues, as we are dealing with the shortcomings today, so that we can get to our next section of getting an influx of revenue coming at the spring term, the January, February timeframe. But we got to start the closeout process now and make sure that as we go forward through the end of the fiscal year, we are paying bills that are urgently needed in order to fulfill the mission of the institution. And we have to build up a reserve in June of 2025 to get us through the summer. Get us through the summer. It's not over. So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. We're going to have to take it on a day-to-day basis, but we're going to need the entire campus community to help us move this initiative forward.
And I'd like to just add one last piece to that question because all of these questions, first off, I want to thank everyone for the questions because all of these questions are really pertinent, important, and certainly I am really happy that you're asking these questions, questions that remain. We'll be looking for ways to get back to the authors and actually to the community with answers. But I'm also drawn to this because my experience um, tells me that I should mention this. You know, in 1997, I worked for Templeton Funds and I launched a mutual fund in India, which was actually the second mutual fund that was ever offered in India. And by the way, in India, their stock market is older than that of any stock market in the West. And so when we launched that fund way back then, when I first arrived in Mumbai, the head of Templeton India asked me as he dropped me off at the hotel from the airport, and he said, "So, Ron, what do you think about India?" And I said, "Well, first, everything is on the move. everything. Everybody's moving. I said, second, there's a need for refrigeration in terms of vehicles. And he said, oh, my brother's coming from the US to actually start a carrier operation. And then the last thing I said was that India doesn't need to put a telephone pole in the ground. And I said, because mobile technology is here and they need to simply jump to mobile technology. And he said, absolutely right. So why I'm saying this is that I know that Dr. Burnett said it could be 2 or plus more years, but with technology, I'm just not sure how long it'll take. I think we can actually truncate that time. Can it be done in 6 months? No. Okay. But the point is that we do not have to put telephone poles in the ground. We can actually use our understanding of how the world works, best practices, and also engage our campus as well in a collective effort to move this institution so that it is a future-ready TSU.
Thank you, President Johnson, and that will conclude our Q&A segment of the information session. President Johnson, if you go ahead and make closing remarks, and then I will share how we can keep faculty, staff, and students engaged in the financial action plan.
As I mentioned, and as the screen shows, our goal is a future-ready TSU. And that means the TSU stands just like all the other LGIs in Tennessee, but having a unique combination of missions. That it's a HBCU. It is an 1890 land grant, as well as a regional comprehensive institution like the other LGIs, and it's an R2 and moving in the direction of R1 institution. That's future ready. That's what this is all about. Well, in order to get there, we have to clean up some of the things that are holding us back from the past. Many of these things were identified several years ago. However, a number of factors intervened. And of course, the last 2 years accelerated our need to actually take these steps today. I want to thank you because it's you, the team out there, that's going to make this happen. I want to thank you also because it is your belief in this institution and its legacy of producing legacies that's really going to be very, very important. And I want to also thank you for taking the time today to show your commitment to this institution and to yourselves, because this institution is us. The institution is us. And I want to thank you for joining with us as a community.
Thank you, President Johnson. We do have information. We know that we've gotten several requests from all of our stakeholders about how they can help. So if you scan the QR code there, we encourage you to make continued contributions to the university. We also want to encourage you to stay engaged, most importantly, and stay informed. And we want you to visit the financial action page, plan page for updates and just for general information. And the website for that is www.tennstate.edu/FAP, and FAP is for Financial Action Plan. We also may not have gotten to all your questions, or you may not have been able to submit a question. So if you'd like to do that, we encourage you to submit questions to Public Relations at tennstate.edu. And in the subject line, put FAP for the Financial Action Plan. Again, if you did not have an opportunity to do so, you can submit questions there. This session was recorded, so we will post it. In addition to that, we will be updating the landing page for the Financial Action Plan with all the questions that we captured in this session as well. So once again, we want to thank you for being a part of this, as President Johnson has said. Again, we're going to put up the QR code if you like to continue to give contributions to the university. And again, to visit the website and submit your questions to the email that's listed on the slide. Once again, thank you for being a part of this, and go Big Blue. This ends the information session for today. Thank you.